What would you say is the biggest story you've been involved with at United?
We did the story about Rashford going out in Belfast. I think it was because of our story that United learned that he essentially not told the complete truth to them about not going out, and that he was called in and disciplined.
You never know, Barcelona might win the league thanks to you.
You said it.
Do you think you'd have coped as a journalist under the Fergie days?
I think I would have been scared for within an inch of my life during the Fergie days. I've got to ask questions that challenge managers and are there to, hold them to account. And sometimes they don't like that, and that's just part and parcel of the job. But I've never really had anything that was, I don't know, that could rival with Fergie's days. And I feel like it would have been a hard school to come up through.
Well, I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, but who's the best player in your phone book?
The one that springs to mind is Hristo Stoichkov.
Oh my
That's
God.
pretty good.
That's a Ballon d'Or winner, mate.
It's a Ballon d'Or winner. So you take that every day, don't you? Sorry.
We'll get into it. But actually, we've had a few episodes out since New Year, but this is the first recording of 2026. We're on episode 61. We've got a bit of a different one tonight because we've trying to stick around Highland League, we stick around Elgin City and just kind of local area, but we branched out a little bit tonight. So we're speaking to Mark Critchley from The Athletic. Where are you actually based just now, Mark?
I am based in Urmston, which is I guess it's a town, I suppose, but it's just outside of Manchester, not too far from Old Trafford itself, in the Trafford area, just to the west of Manchester. So that's where I am.
Brilliant. Obviously, we've been in touch. I'll not speak about how we've been in touch, but we've been in touch recently and kind of helped each other out with things and such. But with my podcast, I always start off the same way, always finish off the same way, the same two questions, because it just gets me an idea of a little bit about you, and then the last question is always a stinger because it's personal thought process. It's nothing to do with the player. It's the thought process, and we find that a lot. So, first question, as always, how good a football player were you as a child?
The simple answer to that is not very good. I was somebody who, growing up, my dad wasn't into football, isn't into football really. My mum was. My mum was, she used to go with my granddad to watch Preston North End. I grew up in Chorley, which is a town in Lancashire. It's about, maybe like 45-minute drive north of Manchester. My dad wasn't into football, didn't really play football a lot. And once I ended up at like primary school, started playing football, and I just didn't have that, the motor skills, I suppose, or the dexterity and I wasn't used to kicking a ball around. And I remember I have like vivid memories of even watching lads in the other year play football when it was their turn, and stood with the other lads in my year on like the side watching them and like copying what they would say about the game that was happening in front of them to make it sound like I knew what I was talking about. Maybe this is where it all comes from. Maybe this is why I want to be a football journalist in the end. But yeah, and I don't know, like I just started playing like a little bit, and it's one of those things, isn't it? Like the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more practice you get. And I think by the time I was coming towards the end of my time in primary school, I was a pretty good defender. I could win a ball, definitely. I had a decent tackle on them, and I played a few games for the school team at that point. Once like the coach, having going to the practice there, the coach recognised that I was a decent ball winner, and I played at the back in like this tiny little 6-a-side team between like 11-year-olds or whatever. And I remember just being so nervous and so riven with anxiety that I was going to fuck up in this game. That I think I played twice. The first game I got brought off at half time. I thought I'd done all right, but I got brought off at half time. That really knocked me. And in the second game, I just asked to come off at half time because I was so terrified of making a mistake. So that was based. And then I think I tried for like, I did like the trials at secondary school to go in the school team there and didn't get in. I think I said I could play up front, and I was like, I can't play up front. What are you talking about? I said I could play up front, and they put me up front, and I was shy. So I didn't get. And I remember walking home from school that day and thinking, well, I'm not going to be a footballer then. So that was sort of my career at football. I didn't play for any like local teams or anything like that. Any schools teams, but no like little grassroots clubs or anything like that, because I just didn't. I just had a bit of a complex about being shit and fucking up, even though I think I was all right in the end. But yeah, after that, just playing with my mates, don't get to do it as much anymore. But yeah, because of work and everything else. But I still like to have a kick about every now and again.
I probably should have done my research on this. How old are you, Mark?
I am 35.
35, so you're same age as me.
1990.
Same age as me, mate. Did you go like Manchester, kind of the area you grew up in, things like that? It's kind of a hotbed. Did you come across anyone in kind of your youth days that went on to play pro or anything like
that? Not in football. In my year at primary school, a mate of mine back then was Josh Charnley, who I don't know if you know him, but he's a pretty big name in rugby league. So Chorley, where I was from, it's like it's not quite it's not far from Wigan. He played for Wigan Warriors for a while. I think he's now like one of the top try scorers or point scorers in Super League history. Okay. Wow. He's up there with like in the top 5 or whatever. So there was Josh, who was sporty and good at that stuff. Not really any pros in football. There was a lad called Michael Barnes who used to live next door to my auntie. He was from Chorley. He was in United's youth system, and actually, I believe he made a first team appearance, like in a League Cup game around 2007. I certainly remember that he was on Football Manager 2007, and the little description of him on there was touted as the next Ryan Giggs. And so that was Michael Barnes. I didn't really know him personally, but he lived next door to my auntie, and he sort of, but look, he played professional minutes for Manchester United. I mean, that's the definition of making it, as far as I'm concerned, as I'm sure it would be for a lot of aspiring footballers. So, and then he had a career in the lower leagues after that, and actually played against Chorley quite a bit, and did some damage against us, as far as I can remember. But not so much anybody else, I don't think. Although there was quite a lot of talented players, but nobody who actually made it to the pro level, I don't think.
Okay, no, that's a great insight. I'm glad it only took us 10 minutes to get on a Football Manager chat. We'll get back into that in a wee while. Don't you worry. Did you have a football idol growing up?
Yeah, I don't know about the football idol growing up. I think it's tough. I think a player that really resonated with me, I would say, was Ronaldinho. Simply because watching him at the time, and I would say it was when I was my most purely football obsessed as growing up, certainly. I mean, I have to be football obsessed now. But at that point, when I was like 13, 14, I just loved everything about football. It was the only thing I cared about. And watching him, I remember the game at Stamford Bridge. I remember that Barcelona team. They went there. They were in the kind of, I don't know,
was it gold
colored, peach gold colored kit. And he scored that goal where he sort of hit it with the outside of his boot and curled it around John Terry and Cech, and like on a sort of parabola where it just spins around like that straight into the goal. I just thought that was incredible. And he was doing things that I hadn't seen any player do before. So I think of a player who made an impact on me in sort of like just an aesthetic, it would probably be Ronaldinho. Although I don't know, I wasn't really one for having like, a poster of a player stuck on my wall or anything like that. Really, it was more moments like that sort of resonated with me, I would say.
Well, it's we've had him recently mentioned. I'm a huge Celtic fan, so Henrik Larsson was my idol, and I think Neville had asked him recently who was the best player you played with, and he actually chose a guy called Lubomir Moravcik over Ronaldinho. And I have
I saw this actually. Yeah, I saw a quote about this. Yeah,
I had great memories of Lubo and Larsson playing together, but also Larsson ended up at United and had a good spell there, so it ties in. Right, here's an interesting.
Here's a decent spell, but I think it was slightly. If you look back at the numbers, I think it was slightly overrated. But I don't know. I'd have to pull it up and check.
I think only scored 2 goals potentially. But
that's the thing. Yeah, people are like, oh, but I think everybody's memory of it certainly was that he was exactly the type of signing that they needed at the time, and they won the league that year, didn't they? I think I'm right in saying so. So yeah.
Yeah, he came into
Worked out again.
a great United team, like Ronaldo and things like that, Rooney, a lot of quality in that team. Here's an interesting one, because obviously same age as me, and I coach football. I'm actually a manager and things like that, but I've always been interested in football. My kind of interest in coaching and management, and that only came in the last 5-6 years. Have you been interested in sports journalism since you were younger?
Yeah, I would say I have actually. I think it links back to your first question. Actually, it was once I sort of realised that maybe I wasn't good enough to do it. Then the question you ask is, what's the closest that you can get to being involved with football without being a player? And I know some people ask themselves that question and come up with wanting to be a referee, and I can't understand that. Mindless behaviour. So yeah, journalism to me seemed like a way into it. It seemed like something that, because I think I did as a kid, I would, and this probably didn't mean that I was such a great footballer, but I did read a lot. I liked writing. I liked writing stories, things like that. And so marrying the two together in that sense was something that sort of just fell naturally for me once I sort of realized I'm not really good enough to make it, or even really like regularly for the school team. I remember being sat in. I remember I used to have braces, and I was sat in the orthodontist's surgery in Chorley, and getting my new braces fitted, and the orthodontist was asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said I wanted to be a football commentator, and I think that was what I wanted to do first of all, just because that was how I interacted with football. Watch it on TV and hearing these guys talk about it over the top. And he was like, "Oh, I know somebody who's a football commentator," and I think he was trying to link me up or build me some contacts within the industry when I was 8 years old. But that never really amounted to much. And I think more as I went on, I was pretty good at English at school, and so I there was that natural link there between going on to write about football as well. And I began to just absorb a lot of, people will call it content nowadays, but I suppose back then it was just TV, radio, whatever, about football. I would sit in my room most days playing Pro Evo or FIFA on PlayStation and listening to TalkSport. I remember listening a lot actually to, the BBC Radio 5 program Fighting Talk.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. I think it's still going. I think it's still going. It's definitely not got the same cast of characters that it used to have. But the people that they would have on there would be often sports writers, often people who work for newspapers. And I liked listening to that. I remember downloading episodes of it to listen back to, as I went to sleep as a 14-year-old. It's quite weird behavior in retrospect, but I used to enjoy it so much. I would listen to the same episodes on repeat, and people like Steve Bunce, who's a boxing writer, who I got to meet many years later once I was in the industry, and stuff like that. It was that was my gateway to it, I suppose. And I wasn't somebody who would necessarily read a lot of sports journalism in newspapers. I think I would be probably a better sports journalist today if I had been, because I think it would have given me, and it gives you a better and a clearer idea of what the industry is about. But I guess, given just how much stuff I was consuming, if you like, and how much I was reading and talking and listening to things about football, that when I sort of thought, what would I want to do with my life, and what am I good at, and what the talents and skills do I have that I can apply to this, then it just seemed like a natural sort of path.
Absolutely. Is there anyone in terms of media, journalism, potentially people on the telly that you look up to, you think, oh, I'd like to be like this person?
I think once you've been in it for a while, you sort of, you don't hold anybody on a pedestal anymore. I would say, but there's still great writers out there, and it can be a bit different once you get to know them personally and stuff. I would say that, again, Steve Bunce was somebody who's the way that he would talk about boxing I just found absolutely thrilling and like really engaging. And I think I've even learnt stuff from listening to people like him and others now about, because so much of this job now is about podcasts. It's about being able to tell a story in a visual form, in an audio form. It's not just about writing. You can't really just survive as purely a writer anymore within this industry. So he was one person that I always felt was just such an engaging character and personality and could tell a story. And then more so when I was trying to break into the industry, after I'd left university and stuff, I always thought that Daniel Taylor was brilliant. At the time, I think he was still at The Guardian and their chief football correspondent, and I read his book on United. I think it's called This Is the One, and it takes in a couple of seasons during the mid 2000s. So Ferguson's the manager, and the book is, it's about the journalism as much as it is about United at the time. It gives you an insight into what it is like to do this job specifically, and some of the scrapes that you get into, some of the decisions you have to make on a day-to-day basis, the kind of theatre and of doing the job and being along for the ride. I remember parts of that book were talking about how they would be on the plane with the players flying back from European away trips. That doesn't happen anymore. It hasn't happened at any point. But because they would literally be like closing the curtains, the little curtains that you have in a flight, because to block off the section from the team, because there'd be a fight kicking off between two of the players and they didn't want any of the journalists to see. And you can see from that perspective why the club were like, we can't be having these journalists here. But because it would all obviously leak out and break out afterwards. But that gave me a true sense of exactly what I was saying before, whereas if you're not talented enough as a player to actually be playing the game and be involved, in what other way can you be involved? And that really gave me an idea that this was like, I don't know, like a front row seat. And it still is to an extent. And there's a lot of elements to the job, like the camaraderie of it, the fact that it's weird because you'll be on a trip saying you're watching United in, and I don't know where's the weirdest place that I've watched them. It's not too many weird places. I wanted to go to Astana, which is in Kazakhstan, when they were playing there a few years ago, but the Independent wouldn't stump up the money for it, unfortunately. But I don't know, maybe, I don't know, like you could be in. I've been in Sochi, for example, at the World Cup, or I was in Bucharest back in January. It's not a very weird place, but it's pretty far away. And you're watching United play, and there's a sense of, despite the fact that you are all kind of competitors and rivals on different papers, and you're all fighting over exclusives and stories, there is a sense of camaraderie and team spirit, and that these people become your friends essentially, and you're closer to them than you are people who work at the same company who you might never see. So there's that element of the job is really enjoyable as well, and you learn a lot from the journalists that you work around. Whether when you come into this industry, you think you know it all, and you think, I can write really well, so I'm going to be, I'm going to be ace at this. But there's actually so much to this job that people don't realize. How to ask a question, what questions to ask, how to get a story, how to build contacts, this sort of thing. There's real skill in a lot of different elements of it that I think I certainly, at least, didn't realize stepping in. And you often take a lot of that from the people that are around you.
That's a great answer, mate. There's a good little insight into it as well, because obviously I'm not near the level of football that you're working at. I work at a much lower level, and I actually work in the women's game. But I've started doing interviews and things like that, and it's just it's good to see how it works from your end, is what I'm trying to say, obviously.
Yeah.
Right, here's a big juicy one for you. You've obviously seen a lot of players throughout your years. Give me the best player that you've seen in the flesh.
I mean, I feel like it's such a boring and obvious answer, but it's Lionel Messi. I'm sorry, it is, and I don't think there's a debate really. Like I know colleagues who have watched Messi and how they've counted the number of times that they watch Messi, and they keep a running track record. And I wish I'd done the same, actually. I remember, I think the first time that I watched him was United played Barcelona in 2019. It was like the Champions League quarterfinals, so the round after they beat PSG in that game under Oli. And I was like incredibly excited to watch Messi. And I don't really think, especially on that night at Old Trafford, I don't think he did anything that really stood out as such. But I think it would actually have been maybe a month later that Barcelona beat United, didn't they? And then they played Liverpool in the semi-finals, and I ended up doing the both legs of the Liverpool semi-final. So I was there in Barcelona for the Nou Camp for the first leg, which Barcelona won 3-0, and there was the free kick that he scored right at the end from. It's not that far out, but it was almost just the execution of the free kick.
Yeah,
the fact that he pulls it all the way over the wall and underneath the crossbar right into the top corner, 90th minute, to give them what appeared to be an unassailable lead in the Champions League semi-final. The expectancy within the ground as he stood over that ball, it was like you wouldn't believe any player would go and score that, but with him, it felt like an inevitability. And I don't think that is maybe like that's not his defining characteristic as a player. It's not what he's best at. When you think of Messi, you think of his dribbling, you think of his close control, you think of him being able to just beat so many players and then play a pass that you would never have seen or score a goal that you wouldn't think he could score. But even in a dead ball situation, he was incredible. I'm actually realizing now that I thought about it, that wasn't the second or the first or whatever time I seen him, because the first time I saw him and watched him play was in Russia at the World Cup in 2018 when he played against Iceland. And I remember going into that game and thinking, like, I want to write about Messi. And the idea that I'd had was that I'd heard this thing about how he doesn't do anything within the first 10 minutes of games. Like, if you look at his record, or at least at that point, and the minutes, they've grouped his goals by minutes or whatever, assists by minutes. There's a huge drop off in the first 10 minutes of games, because what he does is basically a reconnaissance mission. He's just walking around looking for where the gaps and the spaces are going to be and taking it in, and not necessarily demanding the ball. And so what I decided to do from that game was just watch him for the first 10 minutes and write purely about those 10 minutes. And like, it was weird because I basically told myself that I was going to write about him doing nothing. And I did. I just wrote about him like turning around and scanning or checking his marker, or like looking for the ball over here and maybe taking a pass, but then playing a simple 1-2 backwards and basically doing nothing. And it didn't really pan out, the piece, because I think he missed the penalty in that game.
Okay.
And it was like, there's this huge messy story. I think maybe it might have even ended in a draw. I don't think Iceland lost. I can't quite remember. But like, there was clearly a bigger messy story from the game than what he was doing in the first 10 minutes, which was essentially nothing. But at the same time, I was quite pleased with how the piece came out, because at least it was something different, and it was a different way of looking at this player that can sometimes go beyond words in terms of having to describe him. I mean, that the last piece that I wrote for The Independent was from the World Cup final in 2022, my last game before I moved. And I was like, I want to write about Messi. And I think I tried to come up with like some crazy fucking, career defining story or piece for both him and for me, because it was the biggest moment of his career, it was the biggest moment of mine. And I was like, I want to like ace it. And I mean, that was not the game to be writing like some big intricate piece from. I gotta be honest.
It's one of the best games of football of all time.
Exactly. And you know what? I don't even think I enjoyed it, because I put so much pressure on myself to write this piece perfectly and to get it out at full time. And I did not get it out at full time. I know it was still half an hour afterwards. He was getting the bish put on him and lifting the trophy, and I'm still there hacking away at this, my pièce de résistance of my career. So that's, I think by that point I'd sort of signed out though, right? I allowed myself a little bit of latitude on my last game. But yeah, like he is somebody that when you are covering him, he demands that sort of I don't know, like I always felt like I had to be little bit more imaginative or do something just a little bit better, just so I could meet that level of his performance and the player that he is. And so I would say it's him. And that's informed through, yeah, maybe it wasn't always at his best when I saw him in the flesh.
Yeah.
But like, it's messy. It's messy. And so everything else that had informed me of how good a player he is before, I took into those moments, and like it always made me want to like write the best thing I possibly could, because I was watching the best player that I probably will ever see.
Yeah. Top player brought the best, the A game out of you, pretty much, Mark.
I don't know about that. Go back and read that piece. I'm not sure it stands up to that scrutiny, but you could judge for yourself.
So what does a typical day of work look like for you?
I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest.
Same here, mate. I'm honestly, a postie and I'm trying to figure it
out. Exactly. If you've got the answer, let me know, because it changes, to be honest. Like I think particularly at the Athletic, a lot of the stuff that we do is a bit more in depth and a bit more, it aims to be a bit more informed, so you can have multiple number of days to work on a piece, and sometimes even that doesn't really feel like it's enough. But I'd say the fundamental elements of it are sort of, I get up about, I wake up at 7. I try and get up at 7. It doesn't often happen, but I get up. I might go for a walk or whatever, have a coffee, and then like usually by 9 I'm sat at my desk. And I know that a lot of my colleagues don't really play it this way, but I try to. I do sit at the desk a lot of the day. Obviously I want to get out there and meet people when I can, but it's not like I can. I don't feel that I can go and play around a golf or whatever. Not that I can even play golf, but like there's an element of flexibility within this job which would allow you to do that, and you get the work done quickly, and that gives you the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I'm somebody who just like pores over everything that I do, and it's just, I think that's just work to me. That's just the mindset that I get in. So usually we would then have like on every Monday we have a call between like our editors and the rest of the writers on the United beat, where we sit down, we decide what we're going to do for the week. Usually if it's not a Monday, then I'll have a call with the editor to just like a little catch up as to what's going on. Then from that point onwards, it's sort of about calling, messaging people, trying to find out information that you need for whatever you're writing that week, trying to find out information related to any news that's breaking during the day. That can be, sometimes it's quite an arduous process. You have to get used to a level of rejection, which isn't always easy when you first come in, and still, takes a little bit of getting used to. It can smart a little bit if people don't always reply to your messages, or like if you call someone and they immediately hang up once you tell them who you are. But the thing is, like, it's this industry. It's not personal. It's not even really about professional stuff. It's just everybody is dragged in a lot of different directions, and I'm always stunned really by how, I don't know, how willing people are to give their time when I'm not really offering that much in return. Like, I'm not saying people don't have motives for perhaps sharing this bit of information, or maybe they just want to tell the story and feel like it needs to be told. But like, I'm always surprised and like slightly touched by, and I really appreciate how often people will go out of the way just to help you do your job, because that's what you're trying to do at the end of the day, just as the same as anybody else is. So there's that. That forms a huge part of the day. Yeah, obviously writing as well, that can take a lot of time. But to be honest, writing is I like writing, and I consider myself okay at writing, so I try and do a good job when I'm writing something. But writing is really only just part of the job. If you do the reporting, if you do the groundwork of calling, messaging, getting out there, shaking hands with people, going for coffees with people, talking to people, if you do that, then a lot of the writing gets done for you, because you're just given the facts then. So that's a huge part of the job. But yeah, look, obviously, like, if I've got a piece to sort of deliver, then writing takes up a bit of time. And I'm like, research, like, so much of it is actually, especially when you're like thrown a really deep intrinsic piece that's going to take a lot of effort, you've got to sort of think like, who's going going to be able to talk about this, you know, because it's often people who are closest to it will be too close to it to really say much about it, right? Obviously, if you can manage to get somebody who's got really intimate knowledge and detail about a particular topic, then that's brilliant. And sometimes you do, and it's great. Other times you might be relying on somebody who, I mean, I always sort of think about it in terms of like, with concretic circles. So if you can imagine chopping a tree down, and you know the lines on a tree that tell you how old the tree is, and you go all the way down into the middle. Well, there's like degrees of separation. So you can imagine, like, if I'm not going on the circle in the middle of the tree stump, then I'm going on the one outside of that, and then outside of that, and then outside of that. And what you'll tend to find is, the further people are away from the middle, the more likely they are to talk, but the less intimate knowledge they have of the situation. So it's about getting a mixture of both. And it's about trying to figure out, you know, maybe this person knows this person and has heard this or that. And that can be like, I don't think I have really the mind for that. I don't think I have the brain for it. Certainly not as talented a brain as other people have for it. Because it absolutely astounds me how people can just know where to go to find this stuff out often. And it's something that I'm working on, and I think it's something that is like a fundamental skill in just basically every journalist's armor. But that takes up a lot of the day as well, just even thinking through a story and thinking through how you're going to approach it and who would be good to speak to. So that's a big thing. That's like a typical day without any sort of like on diary stuff. Then there's obviously like, you know, going to press conferences, going to games, arranging meetings with contacts and stuff like that outside or even around those sorts of events sometimes to fit that in. So there's a lot of things going on at once. And often, actually, I forgot, like a lot of the time, it's podcasting as well. There's so much podcasting now. Like we do, you know, at The Athletic, we do Talk of the Devils. We do The Athletic FC, which is like the more general show. I'm on there quite a bit. I get a lot of requests to do podcasts, not just this one like yours, but obviously like ones that are just day to day. I mean, the other week when Amarim got sacked, I knew from that morning, once I knew that he was gone, I knew that the whole week was basically a write-off from that perspective. And like I had so many requests, so many people asking for bits of my time, and I tried to like accommodate as many as possible. But that is a huge element of it as well, because you don't just work for your company now. You also, you know, a lot of other places want your time as well. But always more than happy to talk and always enjoy chatting, and it helps build your profile, and that's something you've got to be on top of as well. So it's all, you can probably get the sense there's a lot of spinning plates, and it's sometimes quite hard to carve out time where you're off, because anything can happen at any minute, right? Like
that's football, mate. That's football.
That's football. That's the industry. But it's you know, I'm not trying to play the smallest violin in the world here. It's a hugely enjoyable and rewarding job at the same time.
Do you think you'd have coped as a journalist under the Fergie days?
I think I would have been scared within an inch of my life during the Fergie days. I don't know how. In some ways, I think that maybe if I'd been around then, and maybe there would have been a bit more pressure on. I don't know. It's a bit weird. I think you would just have to throw yourself into it. And you know, I've had managers come back at me with stuff I've said in a press conference before, or like cut me down and embarrass me really in front of everybody else. And it's not a nice feeling. It's not fun, but you'd be amazed how people forget and just move on. And you know, the next week it's just, or the next question, it's just back to normal. You know, I don't. The stories you hear about Ferguson's days, I'm not going to repeat it, but there's one in that. There's one in that Daniel Taylor book that I mentioned earlier. That, like, if he'd said some of the things he was saying to me, then I would have been leaving those rooms like quite broken, to be honest. But there's a resilience to it as well, and like I say, it's never really, in my experience, rarely have I had something like that that's lasted more than a couple of weeks. And to be honest, if you probably aren't, people will say that if you aren't getting yourself into those situations every now and again, ideally not every week, but every now and again, maybe once a couple of seasons or whatever, then you're probably not doing the job properly, or you're probably not doing the job like how you should do it. You've got to ask questions that challenge managers and are there to, hold them to account. And sometimes they don't like that, and that's just part and parcel of the job. But I've never really had anything that was, I don't know, that could rival with Fergie's days. And I feel like it would have been a hard school to come up through, but if I had come up through it, I would have been a lot better for it, I reckon.
He almost had his inner circle, Fergie, of the journalists he trusted and the ones he maybe didn't trust so much and things like that. So he maybe got out at a good time for you. As you say, it's a lot of pressure. He's a terrifying man. I've spoke to a few. I've spoke to a player that's played under him in his Aberdeen days, the old Scotland goalkeeper Bobby Clark, and he's on about Fergie, and a younger Fergie would have been even more terrifying, a bit more energetic and things like that. Yeah. So I can't imagine if that's how he's treating his players, how he's treating journalists,
There's some stories, and I think it became it just became a badge of honour if you got a ban off him in the end. And they wouldn't last forever. I know that some of the more high profile ones, like obviously he didn't speak to the BBC for a long time and wasn't on Match of the Day, right? Because of the documentary they did about his son. So there was certainly some arguments that had a longer shadow than others. But yeah, like I say, I think among written print journalists, of which I'm sort of, the equivalent to in the modern digital era, I guess, it became like a badge of honor, as I say, to at least have had one hairdryer moment or one banning order from a press conference. And so, in that respect, I don't think I could have escaped not having that experience if I had been around at the time, because it's just a rite of passage.
Character building, as they say.
Exactly, yeah. Totally.
All right, I'm going to bring in Ryan for his first question. Ryan's actually a massive Manchester United fan, so
he actually knows this, because I might have overstepped the mark, and when communicating through you to him asked about it was the day that Ruben got sacked, so I was kind of like wanting a bit of ITK. So I've kind of went, I mean, to be honest, I could ask you 50 questions, Mark, on United, but I've narrowed it down to 3. The first one that I want to kind of touch on, and I guess topical as of the moment, is Bruno Fernandes's contract and the club away to, at the end of the season, enter contract negotiations. What do you make of the wording of they want to see what Bruno wants to do, knowing that last summer, it was pretty evident that Al Hilal had put, a generational kind of offer on the table for him in terms of wages it was reported like £1 million a week tax-free. And this kind of adjacent story that's kind of been circling the last couple of days about Cole Palmer potentially being homesick. Do you read anything into that, or am I putting 2 together and getting 5? What do you think?
I always say with this stuff, I'm not going to sit on here and rule anything out. That just gives me my coverage in case something like that happens. I think on Bruno, first of all, I think the kind of standoff that there was last summer, I think that's instructive. The club was said to him, well, look, we don't want you to go, but if you want to go, we're not going to stand in your way. And Bruno essentially said the same thing. So it said the same thing back to the club, where he said, it's a lot of money, but I want to stay. As long as you want me here, I'm happy to stay. And I think the fact that sort of both parties were putting the ball in each other's court spoke to just how much of a dilemma that situation was. I don't think it necessarily means that on either side they actually want to, they would rather like part ways. But I do think that it speaks to just how much money there was on the table, how life-changing that would have been for Fernandes, first of all, but then also how it would have totally redefined United's summer. I mean, we're talking not really just about whether it was like 80 to 100. I think there was a few different numbers flying around, but that money wasn't just any standard bid. It was because it was coming from the Saudi Pro League. It was basically cash up front. And if there's one thing that United have been really struggling for the past 12 months, it's been, 18 months, even 2 years, it's been cash. It's been the liquidity that they used to always be able to fall back upon, even though they're having to borrow, to take debt, to, really pull a lot of different levers in order to keep spending at the level that they have historically and consistently spent at, because they're still some way off where they need to be. Now, that is why I think ultimately the club looked at it and said, look, this is our best player. This is our most important player. He's our captain. He's a player that is really, I hesitate to say define the last 10 years, because what player would want to define the last 10 years of Manchester United, given how traumatic
he's been the constant world-class kind of icon in that team for however long he's been there, 6 years.
Exactly.
Coming up
6 years
now.
he's been there. Yeah, exactly. So, but I'd say he's the best player since the post-Ferguson era, no doubt about that, I think. And I think, so there's not this willingness to see him leave, but there's you can't not seriously take an offer like that. You can't take an offer like that. You have to take it seriously, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If for a player that's over 30, when they're offering that kind of money, no matter how important he is to the team, I think that, I at the time last summer, my argument would have been that it was the right thing for him to stay. And I still think that. And when I watch him play as he did in the Manchester derby last weekend, that doesn't dissuade me from that. I do think it's better if you actually play him in the position he's best at, rather than using him in the field if you're going to turn that type of money. And so I'm glad that he's sort of been restored to what I think is still his best position. What will happen in the summer? I think it's interesting. Look, he'll have 1 year left on his contract at that point. There's the option for them to extend again. But if that comes back to, an offer like that comes back to the table, I wouldn't be hugely surprised if there is a different outcome this time, simply because we've been through that situation once now. I don't know if you would say that it's reaching a natural end point, but given that there has been that situation, given that he has stayed another year, given that you could probably argue that the club isn't really that much closer to winning top trophies. And when will it be? What age will Bruno Fernandes be by the time they reach that point? I do wonder whether there'll be a different outcome this time, but we'll wait and see. I mean, the way that Bruno was talking about it, he did an interview with some Manchester-based journalists, some of the pack back in October, and he was being very upfront and direct about it, and really wasn't holding anything back. He's since done that interview with Portuguese television. The way he was talking about it there, he didn't feel that he had necessarily a lot of. His suspicion was that the club actually would have.
Yeah, I think he said that Ruben was the one that convinced him to stay personally, really, didn't he?
Yeah, and there was a strong relationship there, I think. And given what he said about the hierarchy in that interview, you wouldn't be totally surprised if they reach a different conclusion this summer. But again, like I said, I think it was very much both sides saying to each other, "Well, look, we're not going to stand in your way." And so it was a kind of a Mexican standoff. And ultimately Bruno said, look, I'll stay then. I would be, we'll see how it shakes out in the summer, but I wouldn't be totally surprised if there's a different outcome, simply because sort of we've gone down that road once now. And so when it reemerges, maybe there's a different outcome.
I think there's also just a case of how many rodeos does he want to be on, right? Because it's going to be a new regime, whether whoever they end up picking up. He's been here under a good 4 managers now. And like you say, like his age is, and how often are you going to get that chance to earn that amount of money? If it is the Saudi clubs that come again. Well, the next one I have is also quite topical, and it's the kind of state of the relationship between the club, the current kind of first 11 and ex-players, I guess. Obviously notable in the last week or so, Paul Scholes and Nicky Butt were basically getting offered out for a fight by Lisandro Martinez in the post-match Manchester derby interview, and you had the likes of Roy Keane kind of getting quite personal, taking a dig at Carrick's wife about something that had happened a decade ago or something like that. I've read recently that the club are becoming quite concerned at these kind of frictions that are going back and forth quite publicly. How toxic do you think that's kind of becoming in terms of like atmosphere building for the club in general?
I don't think it's helpful. I think you're right about when you say that there are some concerns internally that of the effect that it might have, and that it potentially has had on some players. And so I look, say they got everyone round the table and said, look, can we try and dial it back in a little bit? I don't think that's I think it's a wise idea. I think it would make sense to do that. I do at the same time think, players are entitled to, ex-players are entitled to an opinion. I think if it sticks within the boundaries of being about assessing performance and football essentially, then I don't think many people would have a problem with it. I think that it's not just the Lissandro thing last week, which I was there for actually, or I was nearly there for, because I went down to the mix zone slightly late, turned up, and it was already mid-interview. And I think I turned up just for the question immediately after he'd offered Paul Scholes out for a fight, and listened to the rest of it. And then I was like, "Oh, is there anything in that?" And they were like, "Yeah, did you not hear about it? Like, say, come round to my house if you want to scrap." I was like, "All right, yeah, I think that's probably the line then. All right, we'll use that one." But it's just not. It's not only that instance of it, is it? I mean, Ruben Amorim is
he mentioned Gary Neville,
talking about the Gary Nevilles, and that was interesting in itself, I think, because that does suggest, I mean, what was the message there? The subtext to that is that there are people within the club
that are influenced by this kind of stuff,
who are influenced by this kind of stuff. And like, who was he talking about in that rant? He was talking about the people above him. So it's not only feeding into the players, it's feeding in at different levels. And to be honest, it would do, because it's basically inescapable now. I mean, I watch Neville's like podcast that he does, the one that he does for the game.
The overlap,
yeah. Well, the one that he does for Sky,
post-match in the stands and stuff.
Post-match, that one, because I sometimes just find it's a useful, like at the end of a weekend, just to sort of recap and to know what he's saying. And he is, I think, he doesn't get everything right, but he is an authoritative voice, I think, in football and in punditry. And he has takes and he has ideas that I think are worthwhile listening to. I've not listened to Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes' podcast. I'd see what it's like, but I think if you're talking about comparing Martinez to a toddler, or if you're Roy Keane, taking a dig at Carrick's wife. I know increasingly in this industry, you've got to be able to sell podcasts. You've got to be across the personality. You've got to say things that keep a listener engaged. That's what we're trying to do here. But but also there's a line, I think, where you can cross that, and certainly you do cross that if you are if you have a sort of relationship with the club or with those players and a connection to them. I think a lot of United fans saw those comments last week by Scholes and by Butt about Martinez, and a lot of them were on their side rather than a lot of them were on Martinez's side,
absolutely,
rather than Butt and Scholes, because they could see that, look, he's a player, he's playing for United. We want this club to do well, don't we? Why are we piling on? Why are we bad mouthing our players? And like, I don't know, like, obviously in the press, you're independent, we cover the club. Every now and again, we'll probably write a comment piece about a player who's not had a great performance. And, you could throw that in with the same lot and say that we're just as bad. But I think the difference is that when it gets personal, or if it's seen as just unnecessarily damaging, then it isn't helpful. And that's maybe where it needs to be reined in a little bit.
I think as well, especially when it's not based in fact, right? Like, there was a stat that came out right after they said that, and Lisandro Martinez just came up against Erling Haaland. I think it's 7 times, and Haaland's only scored in one of those games.
He's got a hat trick.
We'll leave that part out. But aside from that, I think...
Sorry, I used the same thing in my piece, but then I was like, he did score a hat trick though.
I think the thing is, like, with Keane, Scholes and Butt, these do feel like more than just kind of like Gary Neville's criticism of like a formation or system or whatever. It does kind of feel like they hold like a certain bitterness towards, maybe people in the club or, the players that are playing now. especially Lissandro being, I consider one of the few kind of collective that looks like he really wants it a lot of the time, which has been like a kind of accusation labeled at the United squads over the last 10 years of, do they actually want to win? So yeah, but my third and final one is kind of a variety of both that kind of goes into journalism as well. How many managers have you asked questions to in press conferences over your time covering United, Mark? Just to start with,
how many have I asked questions to?
Yeah,
I don't know. I suppose I've been around for Jose, Ollie,
Ten Hag, Ralph.
So since Jose, essentially. So it'd be Jose, Ollie, Ralph, Ten Hag, Ruben.
Okay.
There you go.
Out of that collective, who's been your favourite to engage with, and who's one that you've... Could I potentially guess maybe Jose was the one that might have a kind of breath of fire if he was in the woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day? Or
Jose was probably the best in terms of giving stuff that you could write about, certainly. Also, definitely the most intimidating. Like I said, the first one that I walked in on. And so, you were talking about Fergie before. I don't think I could really handle Jose at the start, to be totally honest with you. And I would say that he was degrees less severe than Fergie was. Certainly, the thing about, just a brief aside, I think Ferguson, and something that's covered in that book that I mentioned before as well, is that you got to remember when the lads were covering Ferguson press conferences in the 90s, they weren't on TV. So there weren't cameras in the room. And the thing is that since Sky started putting cameras in the room, and you've got Sky Sports News and everything's 24-hour coverage and whatever, everything's done in the room, in front of the cameras, and that means that the managers hold things back a lot more. They can't call you a fucking clown, in front of a TV camera, or much worse. I'm just trying to keep it slightly PG podcast. So that was a completely different era. That stuff doesn't happen really at all anymore. The biggest blow-ups that you see managers have nowadays, we all see them. They're all done basically in front of the room. And it even used to be that, excuse me, like in the past, print journalists would often be taken off into another room where they would have their own private thing away from the cameras. And some clubs still do that. It was still happening at Liverpool until a few years ago, at least, when I was still briefly doing Liverpool every now and again. So that still happens, and you can still have those sort of disagreements there, and nobody knows about it, nobody sees, whatever. But it's very rare. It's very rare. Jose, coming back to that point, Jose was definitely the most engaging. I will never forget the best press conference that I've ever been in was one, I think it was maybe during my first season covering United with Jose there. And it was around Christmas time, maybe just New Year's, start of January. They were playing FA Cup game, I think, FA Cup third round it would have been. And he'd had some sort of spat with Conte that week about, I can't remember what it was about, but he'd made a comment about Conte, and Conte earlier that day had said something else about him, and he'd said that Jose had dementia senile, which is like, you don't need my Italian skills to see now dementia. About something, and then so Jose, they United beat Reading or somebody, I can't remember, like 1-0, and go to the press conference, asked Jose, right, what did you make of Antonio Conte's comments? And he started to give like the most drab, boring, like peacemaking answer possible. Like, I've just got total respect for Antonio. There's no problem. Like, he's a great guy. What a fantastic coach. And going on and on and on for 2 or 3 minutes. And I was like, I remember sat there like transcribing it, like getting bored out of my mind. Like, when is this going to end? And then right at the end of the answer, he said, but one thing I will never be accused of is match fixing. And that was it. And I was like, what? And I looked around, and then the next question was like, is Luke Shaw all right? He seems to want to a bit of I was like, wait, he's just accused of a match fixing. And then the next question somebody else asked was like, sorry, when you said match fixing, were you referring to the fact that Conte was like convicted of match fixing in like the 2000s or whatever, 1999? He's like, oh, don't know what you're talking about. So then leaves, goes out the room, and then we're all like, what the fuck are we going to do with this? We need to call the legal department. Do we need is going to be some sort of issue here? I was just saying what you said, and it was like the mic drop of that was incredible. And he could string a room along like that and then just drop a bomb on them, and it was incredible. It was great. And so he was definitely the most engaging.
Can I have a guess who was the least engaging?
Do you want to guess?
Eric Ten Hag, perhaps?
Yeah, he wasn't like a natural in front of like the cameras, and I don't think he was not a great communicator with the press, but I do think like his reputation for that was it was a little bit harsh. Like he was his English wasn't great. He comes from like the east of the Netherlands, where it's much closer to the German border, I think, and so I know most people assume all Dutch people speak English, but I think it's out that way. It's more common to speak German. His English was okay. It definitely got better over a period of time. And to be honest, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities with Ten Hag so much to speak off the record. I'm trying to think if there was really any. There was maybe a couple, like maybe a pre-season tour here or there. But I do know that there were opportunities sometimes, especially during the World Cup, Qatar, when there was that mid-season break. A group of Manchester journalists went over to like a training camp that United were doing in Spain and had lunch with him. Chatted about the issues various going on in the club, and he was a much more engaging personality away from that situation than he was in front of it. And I have a degree of sympathy with him in that respect. And to be honest, he usually answered the question if you put it to him, and he didn't always give like the fullest of answers, but he was relatively good for that. Maybe not the best we had, and I do think, to be honest, that we have been spoiled a little bit on the United beat because Jose, as I say, but then Ruben.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Like, to be honest, I've not done a Carrick one yet, and he seems like a really nice guy, but we aren't doing as many headlines from Carrick so far.
Do you think that's why Ruben got like such an outpouring of support when he left, because of his personality? Because obviously on results, he goes down in history as United's worst ever kind of manager, doesn't he? In terms of even looking at results alone.
Yeah. I think that was part of what was. I mean, I was sort of ambivalent with Amorim. I don't know in terms of the results. I think from a journalist perspective, he said stuff that was incredible. Like, I remember being in the room for when he said about United this being the worst team in United's history, and he said, "There's your headline. Go away and write it." And I was like, it felt cheap. It felt like I was being used. There's supposed to be some level of sport to this. We're supposed to be able to be good at our jobs and at least try and get you to say this insane shit. No, Brad, not just like we haven't just blurted out and then tell us to go and write it and write the headline. But even being in the room for that, I felt like I knew the point he was getting at, which wasn't necessarily that I think this team is the worst in United's history.
No, but statistically, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like he was saying that we know that when we lose games right now, people are like, they haven't had a worse start from this since like 1892 or whatever, this sort of thing. So that was the point he was driving at. You can understand that. But then when a manager tells you like, this is the worst team in United's history, go away and write that headline. You can write that with as much nuance as you like. That's going to be the headline. Players are going to see the headline. Most people are only going to read the headline. I know for a fact that had a pretty damaging effect on certain elements in the dressing room, certainly some players. I think Christian Eriksen came out and said that on record a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
As well, didn't he? So, but we were hearing that at the time, like players really did not react that well to that. There was a candidness, there was an honesty to Ruben that was really,
almost too honest.
Well, exactly. He was honest to a fault, and for a journalist, it was good because it opened the door that little bit more on what was actually happening, and blew the door off right at the end. Right, on what was happening. Yeah. But I do think that there was even some moments where I was a bit like, this is a bit much. So after the Grimsby game, the press conference
He said something along the lines of, "My players spoke so loudly tonight," or something along the lines of that.
That was immediately after the Grimsby game. I wasn't at that one, but then I did the presser on the Friday after that, which was before the Burnley game, and he's done this explosive post-match interview where he's basically said that the players are throwing him under the bus, and so that's going to be the topic of conversation that day. And he came in, and he was so blasé about it and laughing it off and being like, "Oh, sorry guys, that's just me. You're just gonna have to put up with it." It reminded me of the Marilyn Monroe quote, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. It's like, mate, you can't just blow that off as if it was nothing. Like, you said that the players basically aren't playing for you anymore. But he was like, I'm gonna do that sometimes. Just sorry, that's just me. And I thought, okay, that's all well and good. And I remember everybody in that room that day was just sort of captivated by how we was just pulling this off. He was like, sometimes I love my kids, sometimes I hate my kids. That's just me. You're just gonna have to put up with it, whatever. But I did come away from that and think, what if you're one of his players and you're like, okay, on Wednesday you were saying that I'm not putting in any effort for you, and you question my integrity and my professionalism, and then you expect me to go out tomorrow and get a result for you. That sort of thing always undermined him, I think. And I don't know if it made him you said about the support that he had. I mean, I always sort of struggled. I think there was elements of the support of the fan base who did support Ruben and wanted to see him be given more time. And I liked him personally, and I liked the way that he dealt with us, again, being so open and being so honest. But he didn't always do himself a lot of favors, and for that same reason, when you pull up his record, or it was really hard to have an argument against them taking the decision that they ultimately took. Now, I don't think that decision was 100% down to results, because I think results are at the heart of it, because there's got to be some level of dissatisfaction with results if you're going to say to somebody, "I want you to change your system," etc., etc. But I just think that, his personality meant that situation was always going to blow up at some point. There was always those tensions were always going to come to the fore, and they did so pretty spectacularly in the end.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Critch. I'll go Panda back to lead.
Nice one.
Right, just to give you, I'm just going to do a wee bit for the sponsors, Mark, and for the sponsors, for the viewers and things like that, and we'll kind of get back into United and journalism chat. If you're enjoying us, watching us, listening to us, whatever you listen on, give us a wee rating on Spotify, give us a wee follow, YouTube, Apple, TikTok, Facebook. We're looking out for our first sponsor for 2026. We've put a couple of posts up on the socials the last couple of weeks, but if anyone does want to sponsor the podcast, please get in touch. Studios do not cost sorry, got that wrong way around. Studios cost a lot of money. I do not want to have to beg, but yeah, I'm begging you for a sponsor. Someone get in touch. We've got a couple of guests coming up who might be able to help us in the next couple of weeks, but we'll get more into that later on. Also, if you want your episodes early, we are on Patreon. It's only £5 a month, £7 to buy the episodes, or £8 to buy the episodes separately. But as I said a few weeks ago, if you sign up for the month and then just cancel, you get your episode for £5. So it works out both ways. Right, let's get back into the chat. Right, Mark, here's an interesting one. I don't know if you've ever been asked this before, but who's the best player in your phone book?
Do you know what? The one that springs to mind is Hristo Stoichkov.
Oh my God.
Pretty good.
That's a Ballon d'Or winner, mate.
It's a Ballon d'Or winner. So you take that every day, don't you? Hristo Stoichkov. I don't know how I found that or got that somewhere. I think I seem to remember having it. Yeah, I couldn't even say how I got it. In this job, you collect these, like, something you get added to WhatsApp groups, or I don't know. It's often Spanish journalists like to share a lot of numbers. They're very cooperative with each other often as well. So I don't know how I got that one, but Hristo Stoichkov, I've never spoke to him, never interviewed him, but I've got his number. I'm trying to think who else. Phil Neville.
Phil Neville.
Christ. Phil Neville. It's not quite Hristo Stoichkov.
No, different levels of player there, isn't there?
I'm not going to top that one, I don't think. Yeah. No, Hristo Stoichkov, I'll say that one. There you go.
Brilliant. No, it's interesting because the last couple of episodes we spoke, my phone book itself started to get a bit stacked out with doing the podcast, doing management and coaching and things like that. 5 years ago, I didn't know anyone in football. I've now got like a Premier League winning captain in Colin Hendry sending me voice notes and things like that, and it was the most surreal moment of my life when he started sending me voice notes. He says, I just got a voice note, and I remember being like, what the fuck is this? And he was like, I'm not much of a texter, but I do voice notes, and then he just started going on. But it's mad. As I say, I think I've only had one ex-United player on here in Steve Pelly Patterson, who'd only had a short stint with him in the 70s, but certainly something we will try and branch out. We do a lot of Highland League, we do a lot of Scottish football and things, but we are going to try and branch out over the next couple of years because I just like to chat about football, mate. I'm absolutely obsessed with it, and that, it might sound boring to a lot of people, but just sitting chatting about football for 2 hours is like an ideal night in for me. That suits me all day long.
Well, I'm enjoying it, so don't worry.
Good man. Right, so I'm kind of interested to know how this goes about. So what process do you have for releasing information about United to the public?
Oh, good question. You're basically asking me to like recite the New York Times editorial guidelines, and I should know them off by heart, but unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to get them 100%.
We'll put them in subtitles.
I'll send them through as see the show notes. Check out the description. Look, I think fundamentally the most important principle is that anything that we write has to be independently sourced with two independent sources essentially, and that is like the standard by which we can trust that the stuff that we're putting out there is accurate and is reliable. We also always would give an opportunity to people who are involved the opportunity to respond, so a right to reply essentially, and so they are given the opportunity to we say, well, we've heard XYZ, and then they say, well, X is right but Y's not quite there and Z's completely false. Look, it's then up to us to sort of go away and do more reporting, do more digging, do more investigating to try and see whether we think that their version of events is correct, or whether there's actually a bit more to it. And so it's a process like that. And you can imagine for stuff that is for stuff that's quite delicate, sensitive, in depth, it can be quite a long process. And so a lot of legwork and effort goes into those. And it can be particularly challenging if there's something that you have to turn around very quickly. So just off the top of my head, we did our piece, obviously, when Amarin got sacked a couple of weeks ago, even, it feels like months. The next day we had our piece out that was like the inside read of Ruben Amarim's exit. Now obviously there's like a 24-hour gap there between the axe falling and our stuff going out, but that piece that we wrote was the process of a lot of information gathering over the previous 6 months, I would say, or for as long as he was in the job, 14 months to be honest. You're constantly hearing little bits of information along the way that I have a note thing on my computer that I just store it in. We have groups at The Athletic where we just share things between, trusted colleagues and just say, look, I'm hearing this, are you hearing that, whatever. And that's the way that we go about like verifying and checking things. And as I say, once it gets to the point where we're confident that we've got something that we can write, or at least something that we want to check, then we would go to the clubs or the players or the agents of the players essentially involved and see whether that's accurate. And that's how it works, really. I think that it is a method which has meant that our journalism I feel like it is trusted. I feel like we are, a bit of a trusted source that people can look to, and they can say, well, if it was in there, then we stand by that and we believe it. And so I think it's given us that reputation. It does make it a little bit harder sometimes, because to be honest, though, if you follow that method exactly, there are often things that you hear that you can't perhaps get a second source on, that, maybe it takes that little bit longer to check and verify it and go through those processes. That means that somebody gets it out there first. That can be really frustrating, given that that you've essentially had the story, but you haven't been able to do it before others because you've had to go through this stuff. But it's only you'd rather be. It's a cliche, but you'd rather be second and right than first and wrong, and that's the most important thing. And I think that is, it's by sticking to those kind of standards and those procedures and those rules, it's meant that we have this reputation for doing really, well informed and quality stuff that you can trust. And it's also often, it is stuff that people don't already know, and that's the hardest thing. And I think that, we talked about journalism quite a lot. I think, the hardest thing to do in journalism is to tell people stuff they don't already know, but that is the purpose of it as well at the same time. And so when you do get those moments where you can do that and it comes together in a piece like the Amarin one, or the ones that we've done, or even we did the Casemiro story yesterday, for example, and that wasn't all my work, but colleagues, it certainly wasn't all my work, by the way, but colleagues putting work into that, coming together, working as a team, and getting that out there just before just before he announced, or maybe as he announced. So maybe there's a story there I can go into some other time. But yeah, that is really rewarding when you manage to do that.
Yeah. Do you find, if maybe you're in touch with agents and things like that, sometimes they'll give you a bit of false information?
Well, I mean, look, I think you're constantly sort of fishing around for info, and I guess, like I said before, you've always got to think, why is this person telling me this, and what motive is in it for them to say this? And that is always part of the process. The way that you filter that is, again, by doing those checks. And if you can back something that you're hearing up through another source, an independent source, then that would lead to suggest that there's something in it. Then if you can go to the people who are directly involved in that, again, the clubs, for example, and say, look, we're hearing this, and then they confirm it, then, you're golden, right? That's you could be confident then enough to print that. And so there are things that you check and people say, no, that's not true, or I'm not hearing that, or, that stuff happens all the time. I don't always necessarily think it means that people are lying. What you'll find is people's version of the truth can differ quite significantly.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, so, that's football. That's football all over.
It's football, or it's life. It's like, any courtroom drama will tell you that people have different versions of events, and so that only makes it more important to speak to as many possible people as you can, essentially. Yeah. And then that's the challenge, because like, not everybody wants to speak as well, or not everybody sees a reason to speak, and so that's the job. So yeah, but sometimes you will. I'm sure people have told me things before that aren't necessarily true. Whether they did that maliciously, whether they did it in bad faith, I don't know. You can't really know. You can only go away, try and verify it, and then you can only really print what you can verify.
Absolutely. So I'm just kind of aware of time things, so I'm just going to get through a couple of these questions, and then we'll get on to your.
Sorry, I'm
No, don't you worry. Honestly, don't you worry at all. I as I say, I'll sit here for the next 3 hours and chat football. It's more for my viewers. I'm just like, oh, poor them. Sometimes some of the episodes we've had 2.5 hours, and and I do wonder, by halfway through that podcast, if a lot of people have stopped listening because they're probably sick of the sound of my voice, to be fair. But what would you say is the biggest story you've been involved with in United?
I think so. Obviously, there's been like loads of really big stories, but then I guess for most journalists, it's like ones that you have like an exclusive on would be the ones that immediately come to mind. And I should have more that immediately come to mind than I do. But one that does is, and look, we did the story about Rashford going out in Belfast. It had already come out few days before that he was out in Belfast, and then he'd missed training on the Friday, and he'd told the club that he was ill, and there was some confusion basically in the intervening days over whether he'd been out on the Thursday night. I think that was the story. So he'd been out on the Wednesday. The question was whether he'd been out on Thursday the night before training, because he'd missed training the next morning. And so, and look, it's not. You could look at that story and think it's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit cheap, maybe. Like, I could see why you think that, like, football goes out drinking, you know, it's not. Yeah, people might look at that and think like it's just it's any old story, and there's thousands of them. But I think in that instance, it was more that if he had deceived the club about going out for a drink, and if he'd missed training as a result of being out the night before, then, you know, that's, and he's told the club otherwise, essentially, then that warranted further investigation. And there was a process over the Saturday where we were trying all sorts of things to figure out whether anybody had seen him on the night out on the Thursday night in Belfast. And I did manage to, like, through like searching social media, to be honest, and getting in contact with people who'd said that they were out that night or they'd been at this bar, and through that managed to get what was basically stone cold evidence that we then, that he was out on the Thursday night, and that he'd been seen there. And then it was a matter of putting that evidence to his people, to United, and then doing the story. And then, you know, I think it was because of our story that United learned that he essentially not told the complete truth to them about not going out, and that he was called in and disciplined. And so it's not like, look, it's not the Watergate scandal, is it? It's not. It's not something that's particularly proud, but it was a big story at that time, and it was something that required a lot of effort to try and get to the bottom of. And I think, you know, I like Marcus Rashford. I like him as a player. I like him as a person. I wanted him to succeed at United, and he didn't. And I think, well, you know, ultimately they've gone their separate ways. I think he did succeed before. They ended up going their separate ways. The relationship was somewhat broken down. I think it was things like Belfast are part of the reason behind that. And so I think, you know, bringing that to the fore was still important, even if, you know, you might look at a story about football goes on a night out, so what?
No, it's interesting to know, because obviously you get the exclusive and things like that, but as we're kind of going back to the previous question, you need to go and make sure that's 100%, because if it's not 100%, then it just looks bad on you guys, you know. But also the kind of following on from Rashford, what's happened since then and where he's at now. You never know, Barcelona might win the league thanks to you.
You said it. Check the post, please. Thanks.
Right, so I made a typo when I messaged you for one of the questions. So who would you consider the better team, the 98-99 team or the 2007-2008 team?
My favourite of those teams is the 99 team. The thing I love most about that team is the balance of the midfield.
Yeah,
I always just thought, like, you've got Giggs, and I know people always say that the midfield or the rest of the team, that the 11 that you think of didn't actually play together that as much as people think. But if you go Giggs left wing, you know, pure dribbler, Scholes. I mean, not so much a creator as he was, more like box to box and more of a goal scorer at the time. I think you know, the sort of creation phase slightly later in his career, but had that element to it as well. Keane, just so dynamic. You know, not a destroyer, not a pure destroyer, but somebody who was capable of that aggression in his game. And Beckham, who would be able to deliver a ball and pass a ball. I just love the balance and the makeup of that midfield. I do probably think that 08 was a better all-round team. And you know, if you talk about, I know there's been a lot of discussion about the United way in the last few weeks. Some of the counter-attacking goals that team would score were just phenomenal. The one at Arsenal. You know, plenty more, just that front three. I think they were probably the better team, and look, if we were having an imaginary matchup, I think they'd probably beat the 99 team. But there's something about 99. I was growing up in 99. You know, it was the first United team. I watched the first United team that I was that spoke to me, I guess. So so that team's my favourite, but I think the 08 team would beat them.
Okay. What's your ambitions for your future in football or journalism? Do you got anything you want? Anything you want to do? Anything you want to get to a stage you want to get to with it, or do you want to get more involved in the football side of things? What's your ambitions going forward?
As long as I can keep getting a decent enough pay packet out of it, and I can keep paying the bills, that's fine by me. I don't know. Like I would like to, I guess, any question that you could ask me about what's going on at United right now, I'd love to be able to answer it. That's the holy grail, right? To just have that inside track on whatever the situation was, and whatever pops up, I would know what was going on. But the thing is that is a bit of a white whale, and it's the sort of thing that you only get through, you probably never actually achieve, but is the sort of thing that takes a lot of hard work and consistent hard work as well. Like, one thing about people think, you have sources, you have contacts. Actually, a football club's like any other institution. People are coming and going all the time, or players are leaving. So any agents that you might talk to don't have a connection to the club anymore. It's a constant process of building those contacts and maintaining those relationships in order to understand what's going on at the club at any given time. And so it's a huge process. If I could get to the point where I was just the oracle one day on that, then that'd be great. But it's an ongoing process.
Okay, so we're going to get into your 11. It's
okay.
It's pretty stacked out. I had to Google two players. One player, sorry. I had to Google one player. I'd heard
one.
of it.
I thought you'd have to Google two. I thought you would have to Google two.
I Googled Andy Teague, but I definitely have heard of him, and when the picture came up, I'm like, yeah, I know this guy from somewhere, but I just couldn't put my finger on it.
Okay.
Schmeichel, Arthur Albiston, Andy Teague, Chiellini, Irwin, Gattuso, Gascoigne, De Bruyne, Jack Dorney, Maradona, Messi. That's what formation you playing?
I think in my head it's a 4-3-3.
Yeah.
Or it could. Yeah, it is a 4-3-3. It is a 4-3-3. I got to be honest, right? When you gave me this task, I was really excited about it, and then I sat with it, and I was like, it sort of made me realize how little I experience football through enjoyment now, which is quite a sad thing to say.
Yeah.
But if you're asking me, like, who are my favorite players, I feel like 10 years ago I would be able to reel off an 11, and somehow now it was a real effort for me to try and think, like, not just who's, because it's not, I didn't approach it from who's good, and you can, some of the names in there you can tell it's a mismatch.
That's the whole point for me. It's got to be your personal favourite players. I done one, and like, I had obviously your Henrik Larssons and things like that, but I remember UC Jääskeläinen was my goalie, just because I just remember being absolutely brilliant. Olaf Melberg was one of my centre backs, and it was just because I loved the guy, But some of these names, you got big names in there, but you also got like names you wouldn't see now and again, like Dennis Irwin. I don't think he's one of the most underrated players of all time. And you won't find him in much 11s, but if you look back at the history of Man United's, I'll go the right backs and their left backs, I don't think there's anyone better than him.
No, I don't think so. And to be honest, the fullback positions were two that I really struggled on, because I was almost tempted to just go, because if I was doing my standard answer, like right back, I was like Cafu, but everyone will pick Cafu.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone picks Cafu, Roberto Carlos left back, obviously, because I think I wanted a bit of a United theme in it, I suppose. But Dennis Irwin, hugely underrated, as you say. One of those players that I think is sort of so underrated that he's starting to become rated as well, because there's like a recognition that, maybe he didn't get the appreciation he deserved during his time, and now when people go back and like, who's the best left back in Premier League history, a lot of people say Ashley Cole, but Dennis Irwin's right up there as well, I think.
Yeah.
So I thought I wanted to put him in just because otherwise I just didn't want to be basic and say Roberto Carlos. Arthur Albiston, though, like, I actually made a rule that I would only pick players that I watch play. I don't know if I've ever seen Arthur Albiston play, but I was coming on a Scottish podcast, so I wanted to have a Scottish player in there.
Brilliant.
And I also went on a stag do with his son, Ryan. So it was top guy, and I haven't seen him since. So I just wanted to shout out Ryan in case there's the remotest possibility he's listening to this podcast. I've put your dad in the all-time 11, and there's a United connection there as well. So Arthur Albiston got in at right back. I mean, do you want me to talk through some of the weirder ones? Shall I go through?
Yeah, go for it. Give us your Andy Teague and your Jack Dorney, because it's obviously just personal choice, personal favourites. I want, who are they and why did you like them?
So my team is Chorley. As I say, that's where I grew up. It wasn't. I'm not going to pretend like it was always the team I supported. But when I was at uni, we got Gary Flitcroft as manager, and bit of ex Premier League, stardust, sprinkled on a team that was, I think, then in the 7th tier of English football. And so I started going back from uni and like seeing my mates that I hadn't seen for years from school and going watching Chorley with them. I eventually moved back to Chorley for a while, like after I'd left uni, and was like, I had a season ticket home and away. And it was following my like local club and having that local identity. I know people harp on about it, bang on about it, non-league football and stuff like that, but it was just such a proper connection to like who I am and where I'm from that I just sort of felt, it sounds wanky, but like I did fall back in love with actually going to football matches again, just because it was easy to do. And so Andy Teague was the captain of the team that was promoted from the Northern Premier League Division 1 North in 2010-2011. He joined midway through the season. He stayed with us for about 10, 12 years after that. Centre half, shaved head, missing a tooth, often like bandaged up. I've seen him get into all kinds of scraps. I've seen him on a night out. You know what I mean? I've got his phone number. He's not the most famous. Hristo Stoichkov beats him on that, but I've got his phone number. Captain, leader, legend, just like a proper warrior for a centre half. And that's what I wanted in my centre half. So I paired him alongside Chiellini, who I always just loved how much of a warrior he was as well. I don't need any of this cultured passing out the back nonsense. Just two absolute brutes who are going to stick their head in places that nobody would want their head to go. So they're in there. Jack Dorney was he was sort of like played left and right wing in that team. He was like some kid. I think he'd been at Bury before. He scored the winning goal. Well, the sort of clinching goal is 2-0 in the playoff final against AFC Fylde at Victory Park, and it was like 87th minute. We've been leading 1-0 since the first half, but one of those games where you never know. You're bricking it for the whole thing, and they had one cleared off the line just before, and then he just goes up the other end and just bangs one in from like 25 yards out, and then all on the pitch afterwards, and I was like grabbing him and hugging him, and so and he stuck around for a while afterwards as well, and he'd been one of our best players that season, so he gets in there as well. Just I guess coming off I don't know. Now you mention it, what 4-3-3? I wanted Maradona as the 10, and I don't really understand. He's supposed to be the 10. So
you'd probably have Dorney and Messi wide, and then you'd almost have Maradona as a false 9.
I suppose. That doesn't feel right. I don't really want that. I kind of wanted Messi sort of up front and Maradona behind him, and then I guess, am I putting Kevin De Bruyne right wing? I had De Bruyne in there. People might wonder, like, covering United, why have you got him in there? But I mean, I've covered United and City and the Independent. Certainly, I was doing both, and I've just never seen a player find angles on a pitch in the way that he did. There was the level of the press box at City is like, I always think it's just perfectly in line with the trajectory of a De Bruyne pass. And there's been several like these crosses that he would just play from the inside right channel, when they'd be attacking I think it's the south stand second half, and he'd always play this ball that you'd just watch, and it would find somebody at the back post. No matter how many defenders are in front of him, he'd always find somebody at the back post for a tap in. Just like incredible. The vision of him is incredible. We did a book at The Athletic this year about the 100 greatest players of all time, and I got assigned a chapter to write about De Bruyne. I was like, what am I going to write about him that hasn't been said before? And so I interviewed a professor in peripheral vision in football, and the effect that it can have, and was like showing him De Bruyne passes again, a game against Stoke, where there's one. There's a famous one that is an assist for Sane, but there's another one which is like a pre-assist that I actually don't understand. I think it's to Sane as well, but I don't understand how he sees it, because Sane's behind him, and yet he plays this like slide rule pass that manages to pick up Sane's run coming from behind him, that he then squares to Sterling for the goal. Like it would have been intentional. It's not an accident. I just don't know how he did the things that he would do on a regular basis at City. And so I thought I had to put him in there as well.
You're not actually. I've actually had a United fan on here who also put De Bruyne in his 11. So I think that shows a sign of respect. You know, it's everyone can respect a good player when they're a really good player like De Bruyne. Just an interesting one, because obviously being a Celtic fan, I'm not a big fan of him, but I can.
Which one actually?
The two of them,
There's
because
two of them.
there's two of them. There's Gattuso and Gascoigne, who both played for Rangers, and I'm not going to deny they were both brilliant players. I think Gattuso was the perfect complement to Pirlo in that midfield, a bit like the balance you said with the '99 team. It was almost perfect, the two of them, even though I'd say Pirlo was a bit more defensive than Paul Scholes was. But Gascoigne, Gattuso, going with your midfield there, what kind of... I'm asking you to make an imaginary team here, so you can put them wherever you want, but where would the two of them play together? Because they're Gascoigne's a bit off the cuff, and he'll do things. I've listened to a few interviews about guys, and especially when he was playing at Rangers, and it's like you would make the run that you've been going through and training and things, and all of a sudden Gazza's just went on a dribble, he's taken on two players and he's hit one from 30 yards, and you can't predict what he's going to do next. A lot of people have asked, did you enjoy playing with him? And a lot of the time the answer is no, because they didn't know what was coming from him.
Right. Interesting.
I can see the two of them almost having a punch up on the pitch with each other, but when it's good, it's...
That's what I'm aiming for here. That's what I'm aiming for. I want personality in this team rather than anything else. But we might not win a lot of games. So you'd hope we would, with Maradona and Messi in the team, as well as a lot of other talented players. And Jack Dorney, no less. But I wanted to pick a team that was personality. I think going for Gattuso was because that was, I said before I was a ball winner when I was playing. That was sort of what I morphed into when I was like Gattuso. I could just run around the midfield, take the ball off people, and just give it to somebody else, and be aggressive and like scrappy. And I'm by no means a hard man. He's certainly a lot harder than me. But I always appreciated the way that he played. I don't think I don't know how good he would be in the modern game, because now you need players who are able to spray a pass or move the ball forwards. And I don't know if that was part of his game, but I'm sort of pouring one out for the footballer that I maybe could have been if it was still acceptable to just run around getting people's faces and nick the ball off them every so often and get a yellow card or a red here and there. So that's why Gattuso was in there. And Gaza, I think, again, I probably didn't watch a lot of Gaza, but there's I did sort of get swept up in the mythology around the 1990 World Cup in retrospect. So years later, when I was watching World Cups myself and reading about the history and stuff like that, and watching him, documentaries about him, reading books about him, I know what you say about his unpredictability, but I like that. I actually want that. I think there needs to be more of that. Football, I think, has become a sport where it's become quite predictable, quite staid, quite, it's about patterns of play. And I understand that this is an effective way of playing, but I like players using their own imagination and their own sense of invention to do things with the ball that opponents won't expect. I think that's, unpredictability can often be your greatest strength in that respect. I think that tactically the game's shifted so much in a different direction. I would like to see it go back to something more akin to that. And Gaza was probably the English player who came closest to that. I know there's always people saying, it's like having Gascoigne again when it's Foden or whatever. And Foden's brilliant, and I love how he manipulates the ball and how how he can just dance through people, and I can see that as well. But it's all within a much more sort of defined system. Whereas I feel like Gascoigne was of an era where you could express yourself a little bit more, and so that's why he's in there as well.
I think I get that comparison from a lot of people all the time as well, but I just don't feel Foden as the same player. I think if you were, just my personal opinion, if you're going to compare Gascoigne to a modern player, I think Rooney's got to be the answer for Gascoigne.
Yeah. No, I totally see that. And there was that similar sort of, I don't know if you would even call it just aggression. To be honest, I wanted to put Rooney in as well. I had to fit Jack Downey in, but I wanted to put Rooney in.
His super sub.
Yeah, Rooney and Ronaldinho, as I mentioned before, I wanted to put Ronaldinho in there somewhere as well. Rooney, I mean, a lot of United fans would maybe disagree with this because he wasn't their player at that point, but the 2004 Euro 2004 Rooney, just like a force of nature. I remember, the filmmaker Werner Herzog, the director. I think he described him as as a bison. Rooney at that tournament, and he looked like a bison. He looks like this round kid that can just barrel through people, and has all that intensity and aggression. I loved that version of Rooney as a player, and he didn't change a lot, to be honest, but there was something so precocious about him at that point. So given he was so young, and yet he could just command the game and just, like I say, just barge through it and make things happen. I loved that version of Rooney as a player, and I think, I slightly regret not having him in there, but I had to.
You've got to accommodate. Yeah, you've got to accommodate these kind of players. Absolutely. As we say, it's at the end of the day, it's a personal opinion 11, and it just gives me a deeper insight into you, and it's great. I love it when people throw me up. I've had so many standard 11s on this team. A lot of the time, because I've ex-players on, it's normally the best players they've played with and things like that. Yeah. But now and again, I'll get somebody that'll just give me a world 11, and it is quite literally a world 11 at the time. And I'm glad I'm of a certain age, because a lot of people I get on my podcast are similar ages, and there's no mention of Neymar, nothing like that, and I love it, because I hate players like that. Like, it's not, I can't deny he's got a talented player and he's had a great career and things, but just not my style of play. I'm not a fan of modern style of play. That's probably why I'm involved in the women's game, because it's a very direct game. It's end to end and high scoring and things like that. And but no, fantastic. I'm going to make you pick a captain.
Oh, okay. Oh man, I don't know if it can't really be anyone but Andy Teague, I suppose.
Brilliant, love it. And do you have a gaffer?
I didn't think of that one. Why not Ruben Amorim?
He'd get a tune out of him, no bother.
Yeah. The press conferences would be good, at least. That would be entertaining. We said we wanted personality, so there you go.
Exactly. I can imagine him and Schmeichel getting on just fine. But right, before we get in the last question, thank you very much for your time tonight, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
No, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
As I say, we're trying to branch out a little bit more. So, if you're enjoying listening to us, let us know in the comments. We can set up more interviews like this. It doesn't always have to be Highland League. Highland League's very, very popular on this podcast, and my most recent podcast episode, 60 with Tyler Porter, somebody that Mark's never heard of in his life. A bit
he knows Kyle McCauley.
He brought through Kyle McCauley at Elgin, so.
Okay, well, interesting.
You find yourself, Mark, football's all about connections. There's always a connection somewhere. It's a bit like the tree and the rings, you says. If you can't find somebody in that inner ring, you just go out a bit and you'll find someone. So
exactly.
I'll
cut this bit out if I need to, but Mark, is your story up about McCauley on The Athletic yet?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it went out.
Are we able to link that down below? I don't think there should be any problem with that, is there? If anyone wants to go check it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can send you guys the link, and then you can put that down below.
Yeah, not every day someone from Elgin becomes United's head of scouting.
So true. So true. But thank you for your time, mate. This will be out, well, this is a weird bit for viewers because they're already hearing it, but this will be out a week on Monday, because I release every fortnight on the Monday. Final question, as I say, first question is always the same, last question is always the same. It's a bit of a a left wing one, but we'll go with it. If there's a penalty to save your life, anyone in world football, anyone in your personal life, it could be your mum or your dad taking the if there's a penalty to save your life, who takes your penalty?
So I am choosing Mario Balotelli because he has like an exceptional penalty record. But also, I sort of like the jeopardy of thinking, is he just going to try and backheel it or something? And like totally
and you know if he's missing, he's not actually giving a shit.
No, exactly. Precisely.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's like it's got a nice balance between I'm probably going to survive because he's sick at penalties, but it gives everybody who's watching on a little bit of suspense as to just whether I might actually get the bullet. So there you go.
Well, as I say, thank you again for your time. I'm going to say you're going to have a busy few months ahead of you with everything that's going on at United just now, with managerial changes, a big couple of windows to come up and things like that. You probably have the next week quite busy because I think there's a bit of activity expected at United. I'm a Celtic myself. There's meant to be 12 players coming in and it's took us 3 weeks to sign one striker. So I'm not holding out hope, mate. Don't worry. But Martin O'Neill's back. That's the main thing. If you're needing a manager, there's a guy called Wilfred Nancy who's looking for a job just now. But
I've heard he's all right.
Yeah, I'd avoid that one if I were you.
Well, if he was on the interim list, or maybe the permanent one for the summer, let's see.
They got sacked the same day, did they not? It was a bad day for 3-4-3, wasn't
it? Yeah.
Okay, I'll be in touch, Mark. Thank you very much for your time, mate. Okay.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Pleasure.
Thank you. See you later. Bye-bye. The Football Journals is now on Patreon. If you sign up on Patreon for just £5 a month, you can get access to our upcoming guests and the chance to ask your own questions, the ability to watch our podcast with full video exclusive, audio only on all other platforms. You can get your episodes earlier than anyone else, sometimes a few days, sometimes a week. You will get your episodes earlier than everyone else. Chance to request guests of your choice. We will do them our utmost to get them on the show, if obviously within reason. I can't go asking Cristiano Ronaldo on the show. And one bonus episode per month. There's already a bonus episode on there. You'll get a further bonus episode every month. Sign up today at patreon.com/footballjournals, capital F, capital J. That's a sign up today at patreon.com/footballjournals, capital F, capital J.